Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our special show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of national and international issues. Now today we're going to talk about the US-China relationship and specifically the Biden-Xi virtual summit. Now, to further understand and analyze all aspects of this complex relationship between US and China, we have with us a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, I have with me in the studio Professor Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He's Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome, Dr. Chaulia. We are also joined by two more guests. Elizabeth Broy is joining us. She's a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. And former Ambassador Meera Shankar is also joining us today. Welcome, all of you, to Sunset TV. Let me begin with you, Dr. Chaulia, and let's first start by understanding the contours of this complex relationship. Some points which I have mentioned in the introduction, but it goes beyond that as well. There is a lot of posturing happening between US and China for quite some time now.
Yeah, Vishal, I mean, it's a big powers, two major powers, and for them to have a 3.5-hour-long virtual meeting shows the number of issues that have piled up. And complex is in many ways an understatement. I think essentially it's a conflicted relationship and one which has intense competition, rivalry, and ultimately, I think great powers that are quite different in terms of their value systems. You could see that in the summit, the points Biden was raising and the rebuttals that Xi Jinping was making, it was quite clear that they disagreed much more than they agreed on many things. But, like even during the Cold War period, when the Soviet Union and the US were competing, there was the so-called strategic stability. The idea that they will keep the communication lines open, but continue to tussle. So it's not like this is going to lead to some kind of a golden era or an improvement in relations. I think that this is more, like you said, one of it is to show the world that each side is responsible and we are not, triggering this new Cold War. The other side has to behave responsibly. So I think a lot of it, in fact, the initial comments that were made public were made to look like, statesmanship by both the leaders, which also plays well in to some extent to the domestic audience. But overall, if you see the trajectory, the power gap is narrowing between China and the US. The US is highly insecure about it being overtaken in most of the power indicators in the coming years and decades by China. Okay. So it's natural, the incumbent power will not want rising power to overtake it. So conflict, I think, is unavoidable. And all the flashpoints they talked about, you mentioned the domestic ones for China, on which they are very hypersensitive. The Chinese, apparently, Xi Jinping told Biden that you don't cross red lines and, don't play with fire on Taiwan, don't interfere, this is an internal affairs. So I think it was actually quite testy and heated. Okay. And that shows that great power relations today, they're saying managing the conflict, managing the competition, I think that's the most they can do. They cannot avoid it. And as we go forward, the structural realities underlying are such that China-US, you cannot expect anything but a clash.
Quite a lot of points there. You started with certain key ones, both Mr. Shankar and Elizabeth have added more to it. But coming back to the key focus areas, and as both of them are pointing out, do you also agree that the three elements which will eventually have a lot of focus from both sides will be trade one, technology another, and obviously, the defense-related issues. There have already been questions which have been raised on China's nuclear stockpile. China has retorted, in a manner of its choosing to United States on that.
Yeah, you're right, Vishal. I mean, trade and technology are kind of like longer-term indicators of this competition. The geopolitical tussle is right now. I mean, the Indo-Pacific command of the US is there, and there is a cat-and-mouse game going on in the South China Sea, in the Western Pacific, even up to the Indian Ocean, where we are cooperating with the US and other Quad partners. One of the important points that apparently Xi Jinping raised today, and the Chinese media are giving that more prominence, is that he told the American counterparts that dividing the world into blocks is harmful and is the greatest threat to peace. What they mean is that they don't want this US alliance system to try and contain China's rise, which is, of course, an old Cold War type strategy. So I think that's there. The geopolitics undeniably is a major, in fact, most of the tension and the news that we get comes from the geopolitical rivalry. But trade, the Trump-era sanctions, tariffs have not been lifted. Biden has not removed any of those, and the Chinese are hoping they will lift them. The Chinese think because of the inflation and the shortages in the U.S. is now in a weaker bargaining position and will open up to Chinese goods. But I think that Americans want to drive a harder bargain. And technology, definitely the 5G, AI, all these fields, China is investing strategically. The gap is reducing. You see, every day, from an American point of view, if you're looking at it, it looks like if I don't act now, if I don't act urgently, they will not only catch up but overtake. And this is in the Chinese DNA. It's not only Xi Jinping, all the way back to Mao Zedong, 1950s, 1956, as early as that, the founder of the Chinese People's Republic was saying, we have to one day surpass the United States. So they have that, the gene for dominance and hegemony, which is creating a lot of anxiety and fear among the US allies in the region. So I think I see a clear division. Whether the Chinese like it or not, I think the division is inevitable because the Chinese are not stepping back. The Chinese said, we will establish a new model of major power relations. This was Xi Jinping when he met Obama, 2015. Even at that time, they were saying, we have to avoid conflict, we should not repeat Cold War, win-win. They use the sweet talk. But then when you look at the actions, the Chinese are actually relentlessly pursuing hegemony. So I think that is where the US has to draw a line. And if they don't allow, if they don't draw a line and say, okay, we'll coexist, you take one part of the world, we'll share another part of the world, I think that will lead to erosion of US power. So I think a lot of American elites, a lot of American strategic thinkers are highly worried. And I think the decisive time is now. There is a perception, especially among Republicans in the US, that Trump is soft and that, Biden is soft compared to Trump and that he needs to go harder at China. But I think the Biden strategy, at least what they say is, talk softly but carry a big stick and show the Chinese that we have an alliance system. And this is what is like the red rag to the bull. The Chinese get really mad because they don't want this alliance system to form to hem their rise. So I think that is the fundamental contradiction in the relationship.
And indeed, the US president did mention the allies at least more than once in his initial remarks there. Last question to you, Dr. Chaulia, and coming back to how does it affect us, India? And Mr. Shankar was pointing out some aspects of it. This is really important because this is all happening in our backyard.
Yeah, if there is a new Cold War, and I think there is one, whether you want to call it one or not, I think we have to be geostrategically shrewder and take advantage of it. There's no question our alignment is with the US this time, and the Chinese know it. The Chinese are trying to pressurize on the border, saying you get away from the US and then we'll treat you better at the border. Look at the kind of blackmail tactics we are facing. So we cannot back away from this. This is an era of nationalism, hyper-nationalism. If Xi Jinping is nationalistic, Narendra Modi is also nationalistic. We are not going to back away from this. So I think we are getting ready for this long confrontation ourselves. And in the process, the US is going to matter a lot to us. And whatever minor differences we have with the US, I think we have to set them aside and focus on the big geopolitical challenge, which is that we have to counterbalance China. There's just no way. Dr. Jaishankar calls it rebalancing. We are all for it. And I think on that matter, the Chinese, we have to understand the Chinese mindset. There is a Chinese proverb and they keep saying it. In the sun, in the horizon, there can be only one sun. There cannot be two. They don't want to share power with anybody. They don't believe in multipolar world order. India believes in multipolar world order. So there is a fundamental conflict in the way we look at the world. Our outlooks are different. So if the US is still willing to countenance India's rise because it's a democratic country. Indeed. And there's no clash of values. There's no threat to the Western values there. So I think India-US partnership will have to endure and we have to take advantage of this. If we are saying if there is investment is moving away from China, then it will relocate to India, right? And there's a talk about a lot of the venture capitalists moving and reinvesting in India. So if there is a zero-sum game between China and the US, it's not harmful to us. Let's take advantage of it and let's benefit from it and maximize our gains because we have to, if the Chinese want to catch up and overtake the US, one day our goal, our dream as Indian nationalists, we have to catch up with China and overtake China. Okay, indeed, those are very, very important aspects there. Thank you so much, Dr. Chaulia, Ms. Elizabeth Braw, and Mr. Meera Shankar as well for sharing your inputs and views on this very important aspect